coming up on the Canna Cribs podcast.
So I ended up managing multiple indoor facilities, and the largest one was about 250,000 square feet. Definitely for flowering plants, it needs to be done at the beginning of the cycle. Depending on the veg period, you might have to do some pruning at that point, or if not, then within the first 3 weeks of flower. And so if you have a vertical rack, then you'll be able to keep tons of these plants and with minimal effort or minimal work. Cannabis is such a special plant that you can make mistakes and start things over, and each cycle is so short, and you can continue learning and things like that.
Hey, I'm Nick, creator of Canna Cribs and Growers Network, where we have educated millions of people on how to elevate their craft. I have toured some of the largest grow operations, befriended the best growers, and built a network of the top cannabis companies. Join me on this next adventure where I document history with the pioneers shaping the global cannabis industry in real time. Welcome to the Canna Cribs podcast. The Canna Cribs podcast is brought to you by the top brands in the game. We have 6 categories we want to highlight to help you elevate your craft. Starting off with cultivation by Grodan, lighting by Horticulture Lighting Group, nutrients by Athena, climate control by Quest, post-harvest by GreenBroz, and dispensary by TREEZ. Thank you to these partners for helping us create this podcast and helping us bring more knowledge to the world. If you want to support the Canna Cribs podcast, head on over to the link in the description or go to growershouse.com and check out these industry leaders today.
So I'm a consultant, mainly focused on cannabis cultivation. I have a university degree in plant science and horticulture from the University of Guelph. And basically, I consider myself a grower first and foremost. I've been in the cannabis industry since about 2014, and I operated large scale indoor facilities for about 5 years, and I've been consulting for the last, I would say, 2.5. Yeah, I'm based out of Canada and in the province of British Columbia, and yeah.
Right on. And is that the same university that Darren went to?
Yeah, that's right. He did his PhD there. We didn't really cross paths, but yeah, that's the same one.
Nice. Okay, so such a small world. You went to the same university, and then several years later, you're working together. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, maybe that's why we connected so well. I don't know. Darren's a great guy. So
yeah. So did it all start in cannabis, or were you researching other plants at the time when you started?
No. So I focus my university studies in horticulture, mainly greenhouse production and things like that. So when I graduated, I started working in greenhouses, in the Niagara region here in Canada, and I was managing about 10 acres of cut flower production, working with Dutch growers that taught me, a lot about growing plants, professionally and how to run a large scale cultivation operation. And my time there was pretty valuable for learning all the intricacies of greenhouse production, greenhouse cultivation, and how to apply, the science and the theory, from my university studies to growing plants at scale. So that's how I started in plant production, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. So that path took you over to Med Relief. What were some of the responsibilities you were in charge of over there?
Yeah, so at Med Relief, I was basically, when I started, I was pretty much the only one in the company that had any large scale cultivation experience. I was surrounded by people that had been growing for many years, growing cannabis for many years, but at a much smaller scale, right? So I ended up learning so much from these growers, and I immediately fell in love with the plant. So I have so much respect for it now, and it amazes me how much there's to learn about this crop, right? So as time went on, I was managing the one facility at the beginning. It was about 55,000 square feet, just running their cultivation for them, and eventually the company grew so much, and I became director of cultivation. Right.
Wow.
So I ended up managing multiple indoor facilities, and the largest one was about 250,000 square feet, and I think to this day is one of the largest indoor facilities there is. But definitely one of the most impressive ones that I've ever been to, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So during my time there, we were also, expanding to different countries, different markets, and you were developing greenhouse and indoor cultivation projects, and places like Germany and Colombia, for example. So it was definitely a fun time. So yeah.
Yeah. And along that path at MedRelief, they were acquired by Aurora?
Yeah. So I guess just to take a step back, my goal at MedRelief was always, to try to incorporate, modern, let's say, large scale cultivation practices into cannabis cultivation. So while at the same time, let's say, focusing on the science, on data collection, on all these things that can improve the yield and the quality, right? So back in I think 2018, we had accomplished so much in terms of cultivation, not only, let's say, the company as a whole, but more so about in terms of cultivation, right? So and that was one of the reasons why in 2018 MedRelief was acquired by Aurora Cannabis. Right, we had the highest yields at the time, a data-driven cultivation program, so many operational efficiencies, and yeah, so that's one of the main reasons we were acquired. Once we got acquired, we were tasked with bringing a lot of these methodologies to other Aurora facilities, and I believe at the time there was 7 indoor and greenhouse cultivation facilities in Canada, and some in Denmark, and Germany, and in South America there was a couple. So there was a lot of things to do, right? So Philip, whom you met already, my business partner, and I became kind of internal consultants for the company, and we did quite a bit of traveling all over the world, in that 2018-2019 period. But yeah, after that we just decided to leave Aurora and we formed our consulting company.
Yeah. And at what point, Juan, did you realize, okay, it's time to head out on our own adventure and start offering consulting services to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think my let's say my path at MedRelief had been, very fast. I went from not knowing much about cannabis into managing a whole facility, then managing multiple facilities. My team was about 150 people at the time, and things like
Wow.
that. And to working on building new projects, 20-acre greenhouses, things like that, to and then once we got acquired, it was more of a, let's help other facilities, other teams, other growers, and
In
things
the
like
network.
that. Yeah, exactly. So that's where, kind of that itch started, like, hey, this is cool, like I can go and I can help people, I can, help them improve and things like that. And, also see what they're doing, stuff like that. Because at that time, the cannabis industry in Canada was super, or I think it still is, super secretive about, what they're doing and things like that. So for me to be able to go and visit all these other growers, other facilities was really, really awesome. And being able to help them too, kind of share the knowledge that we had kind of amassed over the years, that also, helped. So, yeah.
Well, how cool is that to travel the world to Colombia of all places and Germany and some of these other markets to consult and teach, and just honestly, it's really empowering to see how this plant reaches, every corner of the earth, every culture. They might be growing it the same, might be growing it differently, but it's so cool to see that.
For sure, definitely, absolutely. No, it's super exciting, and at that time Canada was the big market, and then a lot of projects, like you mentioned, in South America and Europe, and now there's so much to do in the US as well. Every state kind of is different regulation, things like that. So it's still super exciting, I think.
Yeah, we have not peaked yet as an industry. There's so much room to go. So let's talk about your individual responsibilities in the group. I know that out of the 3, you're writing this book, right? You have a chapter on canopy management, so I definitely want to dig into some of those details today. And not to be, overlapping with Philip, because we went over a lot of great topics with him, such as light interception, leaf area index, and a bunch of other stuff. So if someone's watching this interview, you can watch them out of order. It's totally fine. But let's start with cloning and genetics. So how does canopy management improve the overall clone quality?
Yeah, for sure. I guess to start, we kind of have to define, what that ideal clone quality is. Like I think, there's many ways to clone cannabis, and it's a species that is so easy to propagate vegetatively that I think yeah, finding that way that is most, let's say, repeatable and will give you the best results. That's where it all starts. So, for us, a quality clone, or the quality that we try to achieve with a clone is, try to take clones that are about 4 inches in length, like between 4 and 6 inches, anything longer than that, becomes a bit too tall. And then if you have a tall clone, that means that you have a tall veg plant, and then that tall veg plant will end up being a tall flowering plant, right? So, we try to just kind of start short and then kind of let the cultivar do its thing during veg and the flowering phases, so that it can get to where it needs to be. And in terms of the stems, for example, it needs to be, not too thick, but not too thin, like in either case, it'll take quite a bit more to root, and as opposed to if it was of the right, let's say, diameter. Thin clones can also be pretty prone to breakage as well. So, if you're sticking them in the media, then, it's easy to start breaking them. Yeah. So, and also having the right amount of leaves is also super important, I think. If the leaf is like kind of like the main engine that keeps the clone alive during that rooting phase, right? It produces those hormones that help the rooting development start as well. It harbors a lot of the energy and the nutrients reserves that it needs. So if you have too little leaves, then it's a problem, or if you have too many leaves, then that's when also problems can happen too, right? So I think having that in mind, having that clone quality in mind from the very beginning, is at least the starting point as to how you manage the canopy, right? The growers do things differently. Obviously, we've seen, small mothers, tall mothers, very bushy, or let's say very lanky, which, it's all fine. But at the same time, what we try to, focus on is making sure that whatever those clones are that you're taking from that mother, is always going to be as good as it can be. So the canopy of the mother itself, it has to be kept in a way in which the light can penetrate, as many shoots as possible, can mature to the size that we need. So like I was saying before, that 4 inches, good stem diameter and enough leaves, right? And because if, for example, if a shoot is shaded, the stem is likely to be too thin, and maybe the leaves won't have enough reserves, and that clone, is going to have a bit of a rougher time getting through the rooting process. And if it does end up rooting, then it's going to be delayed, and then you're going to have a tray with maybe some clones that are fully rooted, whereas some other ones may not be. So there's definitely some considerations there, but definitely keeping that quality in mind in everything that you do when keeping mothers. That's super important.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of your SOPs that you can recommend to other growers throughout the cloning and propagation process.
Yeah, so in terms of SOPs, I mean, obviously we start with how we keep the mother, right? What's the mother maintenance process? How do you start a mother is important. Then after that, the cloning process, where to start, where to end, how we let's say lay out the cloning process as it's happening. We like to have a specific workflow that people can can get through, right? Like with very specific tasks, we like to have one person or a couple of people dedicated to, cutting the plants, for example, or, processing those cuttings that come off those mother plants. And then after that, then making that final cut, for example, making sure that the length is that 4 inches that we're looking for. And at the end, we have, people that are, sticking the clones in the substrate. We like rock wool, but there's so many other ones, right? And we laid all that out in our SOPs as to how it should be done. And I think cloning is one of those tasks that are done with in cannabis cultivation that are very that need to be very structured, right? Like you need to have a lot of people doing it, and it's, to me, it's more like almost like a manufacturing process, right?
It's an assembly line.
It's exactly that's exactly what it is, right? You want to have consistency from tray to tray, from clone to clone, right? So if you have those people that are kind of focused and dedicated to having that perfect quality, perfect consistency, that's going to translate into having let's say a nice canopy, a nice even canopy once you transplant into veg. Once those veg plants go into flower, what I like to see is just plants that look almost identical to each other.
That uniformity.
Exactly. The uniformity is super key, because you don't want to be able, you don't want to have to irrigate certain plants a different way, or have let's say dips in your canopy, or different microclimates that can start forming, things like that. So definitely, yeah.
So your entire crop could run away from you depending on what you do in cloning and propagation. That's what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I think
some mistakes that you make early on could just be domino effect.
It could definitely kind of get compounded later on, and it can be, depending on how many clones you take, or what your planting density is, you can have a little bit of forgiveness there, but at the same time, if you want to make things as uniform and as structured as possible, then starting with that cloning process and having those SOPs down, that's super key.
Totally. And I've seen a lot of growers over the past 5 years. Everyone does it a little bit differently. Let's talk about building out your clone dome or trays. Are you going to put a clone in every single cell? Are you going to leave some space between? What does that look like if we walked into your garden?
Yeah, so we like to just fill the whole tray. Fill the whole tray with clones. But at the same time, taking enough leaf off that they're not gonna get too crowded, right? They're gonna have enough space to be able to let's say expand their leaves once they can actually do that. Because you see that, right? If you take a clone, you take a couple of leaves off, you stick it, a couple of days later, those leaves would have already been expanded, and then they're gonna start crowding each other, right? So if we let them crowd too much, then that's when you're gonna start having some stretch, for example, right? And that can lead to not
problems down the
uniform.
road.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely, it's important to leave not too many leaves on the clones and start that way. But yeah, we fill the clone tray. We use rooting hormone, and then we keep the trays under domes for a couple of days. We don't want to baby them too much, but at least the first day or two, they're gonna definitely need that, close to 90% humidity. But after a day or two, it'll be fine. They'll be able to stay turgid, and then we can kind of push at least the rooting process a little bit. We like to dry out the clone tray as much as possible. And then, that kind of also helps promote that callus to form and the roots to start populating. So within 14 days we have a fully rooted tray, and we're seeing clone
ready to go
pop out. After 6 days, 7 days, we already see the first couple of roots coming out from the bottom. So it's there's definitely a lot to the let's say the rooting process. But once you figure out what the cultivars need, have a very structured SOP, and your team can do it, day in and day out, then it's not a problem. At MedRelief, at that facility that I was talking about, 250,000 square feet, there was times where we had to clone 60,000 clones in a day, for example. And
wow,
you need a good mother stock, and then you need your people trained and all of these things, and a process that makes sense, and that works time after time.
definitely. And I know we're going to get into mother stock. I did have a quick question. In reading that chapter, I came across a new term for myself, germplasm archive. Is that pretty much tissue culture? Is that the same thing?
So it can be tissue culture, yes. A germplasm archive is basically just how we store genetics, right?
Okay.
It can be done, in plants, animals, whatever. But if we're talking about plants, you can keep them as seeds, for example, or tissue culture, or as a live germplasm, as mother plants or stock plants, right? So that's basically it. And there's different ways to optimize this, right? We definitely prefer tissue culture to be the
Oh,
main
really?
way that we keep a germplasm, but we understand too that's not necessarily very feasible for a lot of growers, right? Cannabis is such a special plant that every phenotype is so different, and one person might have a really nice pheno that they spend so much time looking for example. So I think being able to keep those genetics in a mother form, in a form that is easy to maintain time after time, and that you'll be able to take clones off, regenerate, for example, and just keep a few copies in case something happens, then yeah, that's pretty important.
Yeah, and your goal, of course, eliminating genetic drift as much as possible. So however much time lapses, you're going to get that same cultivar every time.
Yeah, for sure. There's techniques now that that kind of help regenerate some of these cultivars closer to that true phenotype. What happens over time is that, especially with mother plants, is that if they go through a lot of stress over the course of their life, let's say, as a mother plant, maybe they're not getting the right amount of nutrients, or maybe the substrate is not correct, or there's some issue with light cycles, for example. All those things are gonna create stress for the plant, and then that's gonna prevent you from having the true to type phenotype every single time, right? So there's now techniques that can help you, even through tissue culture, be able to regenerate some of those phenotypes. Even though it might take a little bit of time, there's ways to be able to do that. But at least from at our level, working with different growers all over, the best way is to just keep plants in their live germplasm, and it doesn't have to be something too big or fancy. We set up 4x2 racks, with multiple shelves, with a little bit of lighting and some drainage, and and when we keep mothers there, we try to keep the mothers very small, try to encourage mother growers to at least keep the as many mothers as they need to keep, to have a good backup, right? But it's basically having those small mothers, they kind of look like bonsais, right? Like, we keep them very low light intensity, in a very small container or pot that's gonna kind of limit their root growth, and we keep pruning them back and cutting them back, so that you can actually keep that plant about 6 inches, maybe to a foot even, right? So so if you have a vertical rack, then you'll be able to keep tons of these plants, and with minimal effort or minimal work.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of farms that we filmed that their genetic vault is like a safe full of seed packs, and that's how they basically prolong the genetics that they want to use forever. Would you recommend a lot of growers to switch over to more of the model that you were just explaining?
I guess it depends, really. I mean, the issue with seeds is that, you might not necessarily get a true type, phenotype, if it's from a specific cross, for example. As you know, with cannabis, we're not quite there with the breeding programs. There's a lot of really good breeders, but, in terms of homogeneous, let's say, populations and being able to get, a offspring that's very similar to the parents, we're not quite there yet. So it's so easy to breed cannabis at the same time, right? That getting that one pheno, it could happen, and you pop a pack of seeds, for example, and some of those seeds, you might select that one winner, and that one is going to be a mother, a plant, right? So you can't really go back to seeds to having seeds at that point. So it's better to at least keep that, phenotype, like I said, either as a small mother, like that bonsai type of mother that I was talking about, or if you have the ability, or the resources, or a company that can do that for you, then, having tissue culture as a backup, it's also an option as well.
Absolutely. Are there any challenges or considerations for archiving multiple phenotypes at any given time?
Yeah. So if we go back to let's say that small mother bonsai type of germplasm, then we like to give them as much space as possible. I think there's a lot of issues that can arise if you have pests or diseases or things like that. So we like to give them space. We like to keep them compact, like I said, with a good environment. Like I said, low light levels. We need to keep them, growing, but not growing too much. Just basically just keep them alive. But yeah, it's a lot. There needs to be a big focus on the pest management aspect, right? How, they need to be scouted thoroughly. They need to be, you need to have your biological controls working there, and applying anything they need to apply to be able to control things. One of the scary things that we're seeing, more and more, especially in Canada now, is hop latent viroid. It's been rampant all over, and viruses and viroids like hop latent, are mainly spread from plants touching each other, for example. So like I was saying, having plants that are well spaced out,
all goes back to canopy management.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And with mother plants, sometimes you do those cutbacks. You have to keep that canopy compact and small, and that also means a lot of open wounds, right? So that's mainly how the viroid can transfer from plant to plant, right? So if the plants are touching each other, there's open wounds, there's sap contact, there's sap exchange, let's say, then that could lead to one plant infecting the rest of them, right? So you definitely don't want that in a germplasm, in a mother room, let alone a germplasm as well. So,
right.
So yeah, we also encourage growers to, at least for mothers, have you have one dedicated pair of scissors per plant, so that you're not going from one plant cutting here and then moving to another one, because that's almost guaranteed if you have one.
So simple and yet so impactful.
Exactly, it's almost guaranteed to spread the viroid, and we've seen plants with hop latent that we grow from seeds, and that were kept in very good conditions and stuff like that. But just one time that they're touching, or one time where maybe the scissors weren't cleaned properly or whatever, that can lead to an infection. Wow. Right? So it's scary. We've seen some growers deal with hop latent and lose some of their most precious cultivars, and having to go through this regeneration like I was talking about, and just it's very stressful for an operation, right? So definitely keeping in mind all these things. First of all, having a germplasm, but also making sure that the plants within that germplasm are kept.
The hygienic processes in place. Yeah. I mean, IPM from day one, stage one.
Exactly.
I would imagine, Juan, that the lifespan of those little bonsai moms, it's not forever. Do you have a protocol for when you're moving on to the next one?
Yeah, like we'd like to keep them about 6 to 8 months, let's say,
Okay.
in the same container. And then after that, what we do is usually we take clones from them and create new ones. Once the new ones have been established, then we slowly phase out the old ones. And it's a very similar, let's say, phase out approach that we use with we're just on production mother plants, let's say.
Right.
So that's basically our time frame. We've definitely kept mothers longer than that, but it kind of like starts becoming more and more unstable. That substrate becomes, very root bound, and the plants can, like I was saying before, can start getting those stressors that can lead to reduction of vigor, or maybe your THC could be reduced, and things that you might not be able to see with the naked eye could start happening. And it's always it's always better, let's say, to have plants that are as healthy as possible and going through that kind of let's say transition and replenishment.
Yeah. So at a broader level, I mentioned earlier, I got a chance to chat with Philip about canopy management, and we went into light interception and leaf area index, and just taught me a bunch of new stuff, which is awesome, and our audience as well. So I just want to start at a very broad, high level. In your opinion, Juan, what is the most important aspect when it comes to canopy maintenance?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is maximizing light interception and doing everything that you can to maximize that light interception. At the end of the day, the leaves are basically just tiny solar panels and that regenerate energy from light. So, and then the energy is used to, make more leaves or roots or branches, flowers, or, secondary metabolites like THC. But it all starts with that, plant capturing light and how effective it is at doing that, right? So, so because the canopy is just a collection of these leaves and branches, so ensuring that it is, maintained properly, to be able to maximize that light interception is what ultimately will get you closer to maximizing your yield for sure.
Absolutely.
I think, in plant cultivation, I think for many crops, not just cannabis, the limiting factor will almost always end up being light. If we talk about cannabis cultivation indoors, or in greenhouses, for example, you can supply the right nutrients, you can have enough CO2, you can, supply enough water, maintain a good environment. But if you don't have enough light, or if your canopy is not capturing the light as it should, you won't be able to reach that full potential, right? There can also be diminishing returns when it comes to providing light, but fortunately, cannabis is a species that can take a lot of light, and getting the crop to utilize that light energy efficiently is, I think, the next big challenge. And with that comes working on things like your VPD or stressors or crop steering, for example. There's a lot of things that can be done that way, but at least in general terms, and let's say that applies for almost all cases, is making sure that light is not limiting.
Yeah. So for some of our audience members, Juan, that are learning about new terms like VPD, for example, vapor pressure deficit or vapor pressure differential, could you teach them a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically, vapor pressure deficit or difference is, let's say, that the internal vapor pressure that you'll find within a leaf, and the vapor pressure that you'll find, in the outside environment or in that area surrounding that leaf, right? And based on that VPD, then you'll have different effects as to how the plants, close or open their stomates. Right. So, with stomates, then you have gas exchange, right? So gas is going into the leaves, mainly CO2, and the CO2 is then converted into sugars when the light hits the leaves, for example. So it's obviously way more complicated than this, but just on general terms,
yeah, this is great.
It's the way for the plant to actually produce these sugars, produce this energy. It all has to do with light and the vapor pressure differential. So making sure that the vapor pressure differential is optimized based on what the plant needs, right? It's goes a long way for optimizing that photosynthetic ability of the plant, being able to produce those sugars, that energy.
You have seen Grodan Rockwell cubes all over CannaCribs and Deep Roots over the past 5 years. Well, check out Grodan's new improved Gro-Blocks with an advanced wetting technology developed in collaboration with the Wageningen University in the Netherlands and trialed by some of the top growers across North America, including some of your favorite CannaCribs episodes to date. The improved Stonewall substrate has more even WC and EC distribution throughout the height of the block and even greater steering control, which results in a faster rooting in, higher yields, improved quality, increased resistance to diseases, and they use less water and newts throughout the entire cycle. Real science, real results. Check out grodan101.com. I'll link the full URL in the description of this episode to learn more. Also, head on over to your favorite social network and check out Grodan 101. Leave a comment and let them know CannaCribs sent you. Let's dive in here. Let's talk about some tips that you have for establishing a healthier mother stock.
Yeah, so with mothers, we have a very specific goal. The goal is to produce as many high quality clones or cuttings as possible, at the right intervals. In order to achieve that, the mother plants need to be able to have a pretty high growth rate and multiple shoot sites at each of these shoots to end up being a clone. The mother plants are grown as a bush mainly, from which multiple cuts can be taken, and the canopy needs to be dense enough to capture that light. But at the same time, they need to be able to regenerate so that the next time that you have to come back and take more cuts, then they're ready to go, and that quality, like I was talking about, that quality is there, right? So so yeah, and that's how you keep the cycle going.
Okay. And now that we have a healthy mother stock, just kind of getting into managing the canopy, do you do anything differently for the canopy of your mother stock in comparison to the plants that are in full-fledged production?
Yeah, it's very, I think, very different. I mean, full production, even though the goal is the same, try to capture as much light as possible. Like I was saying, with mothers, is like you're constantly regenerating those mothers and taking cuts. Whereas opposed to a production or a flowering plant, you set up your canopy, and it might take a couple of weeks into flower, and then after that is just kind of allowing those flowers to develop and the light to penetrate into the canopy and be able to fill those buds at the end of the cycle. So it's a little bit different, but yeah. In terms of mother plants, what we like to do and is very important to us is creating a structure from the beginning. Encouraging the plant to like I said, grow as that bush, with lateral growth and multiple shoot sites. So what we like to do is try to pinch as frequently as we can, pinch or top as frequently as we can, and then try to create that scaffold early on in the plant, and the plant's life, which ends up being that basic structure for the plant, and that's done by topping, as you have, let's say, if you start with a clone or a seedling, right, you top it, and then you start seeing the shoots start to emerge. So the 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, the 8 becomes 16. And that way you have a very good structure, right, in which that's going to support the growth that you'll need to be able to keep taking clones from those mothers, right? That rounded shape that you'll end up having, that increases the surface area, which like I said, goes back to being able to capture that light, and for that light to penetrate deep into the canopy, so that you have the different shoots that come up, then they get enough light to be able to eventually become those clones that you end up taking, that quality that you need, that you want, that the thicker stems, but not too thick, the long kind of shoots that will become that 4 to 5 inch clone.
Yeah. And earlier you were mentioning for the germplasm, the bonsai size. And I've been to facilities. I think Mitten Gardens is one example. Out in Michigan, they had a mom that was like 8 feet tall. It's a monster. It was a Christmas tree. So what's the optimal size? Is there an ideal, weight or bushiness or height? What do you really strive for?
Yeah, I mean, a tall mom can work for sure. But what we like to see is a mother plant that's closer to a foot and a half to 2.5 feet tall. The mother plant needs to be efficient and effective and most important, easy to work with, right? I mean, you don't want to have to, if you have to move the mothers, for example, let's say if they're on the tables and you need to move them to a work area, for example, you don't want to have to move these huge mothers. So rather, let's say on the smaller size,
Okay.
and that way the canopy stays a little bit more compact as well. So that, like I said, there's you maintain that quality of the clones. The light doesn't have to go through so many layers of leaves to be able to penetrate, and you have that clone quality and uniformity throughout.
Right.
So a large plant or a tall plant is usually going to require, more irrigation. They're more prone to stem breakage. Once they start getting top heavy, some of those branches start kind of like falling sideways and breaking and stuff. And, what happens too is that, if you have such a large mother that's producing, let's say, I don't know, 50 to 150 clones. At MedRelief, at the beginning we had mothers that were producing 250 clones each, something crazy.
Wow.
But if you lose that mother, that's a lot of your clone production, right? So we like to, it's almost
Put
like
all your
hedging.
eggs in one basket.
Exactly. So you have to hedge your bets and kind of, have many smaller ones that, can, if you have to get rid of one, that's no problem. If you have to repopulate, like you just make a lot of small ones, and then you keep them kind of compact and producing those clones that you need, right?
Yeah.
So the way that we keep those mothers a bit more compact is we keep them in a pot or a container that's it's going to limit their growth, right? About 6 to 8 inch pots is usually what we like to see, and that keeps that mother to about a foot and a half to 2.5 feet tall, like I was talking about. Obviously there needs to be that scaffolding, like I was talking about, and then continuous work in terms of pruning, removing leaves, removing branches, keeping that canopy the right size and shape. That's important too.
Yeah. And just talking about plant size in general, there's a lot of external factors that might regulate the size of a plant. So, for example, limited plant count, right? If you can only have 80 plants or 100 plants, you're going to grow monsters, right? Or if you're growing outdoors, right, you're going to have a completely different, grow methodology. But could you run through the optimal plant size? Let's say if you do have a limited plant count versus you can grow as many as you want, what's that optimal size you're going for an indoor or greenhouse production versus an outdoor? Because I haven't really heard an answer out there on the interwebs, and everyone has a different answer. So what's the consensus, coming from the expert here?
No, I mean, like I said, there's many different ways to do it, and definitely the cultivation system, the cultivar, plays a big factor into that size. But if there is no plant count limit, we like to mainly grow on tables, so they're raised above the ground, and plants that are, let's say, between 2.5 and 5 feet tall. 5 feet being, that's getting a bit too tall by then. And what that does is that, if you're working on a table, then, it's easier to have to do some of that crop work, that canopy management that we advocate
Mm-hmm.
so much, right? Like the pruning, the deleafing as well. Also for harvest makes it easier as well. And also the canopy is not as deep, right? So the light doesn't have to go through so many layers of leaves to be able to penetrate down. Or you don't have to start doing a lot of, uh, people like to remove some of the lower buds, for example, to get, the top of the canopy, maturing better. But if you have the right size of canopy, that might not necessarily have to be done, right? So if you have that, no limit, then that's basically what we advocate. If you do have a limit, then that's where, long veg times need to be taken into consideration. 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks, depending on the cultivar. And yeah, that could produce plants that are huge. But at the same time, that will give you the production that you need, right? Like the main goal is to increase yield, and to increase yield, you have to maximize, your let's say, grams per square foot. What's my canopy, and how many grams can I get from it? So having those big plants, being able to fill that canopy, being able to fill that space, and doing the correct pruning and the correct deleafing to get to that point. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a little bit more challenging. It's a good thing that at least here in Canada we didn't have those regulations in terms of plant count, but definitely I definitely feel for people that do, for growers that do. But it's not an impossible system. It's there's many ways that you can optimize that as well.
Right. Could you put a number to the optimal density when it comes to mother stock or just overall canopy density?
Yeah, so for mother stock, if we go back to that size that I was talking about, about a foot and a half to 2.5 feet, with 6 to 8 inch pots, we like to see about one plant per square foot. That kind of gives them enough space to be able to grow. They're not too close to each other, that they're, the canopy starts getting too dense. Because if they're too dense, then that's when you have issues with clone quality, for example, because the light is not able to penetrate, or not
The
enough airflow.
viruses you were talking about
Exactly.
passing.
That's right. So, yeah, and also, airflow through the canopy as well, which is super important. You want to mitigate those pathogens, or the bacterial or fungal diseases that can form in those conditions, right? So yeah, that's for mother plants. I would say, about a foot one plant per square foot.
Mm-hmm.
And then for production plants, for flowering plants, it definitely changes. Like I said, if there's no plant count limit, that's when you can start playing around with things. But we definitely like a system in which we don't veg for so long. So our veg phase is about 1 to 2 weeks, and then they go into flowering, and then the plant, the canopy establishes itself, and depending on how the specific cultivar grows, if it's a cultivar that likes to, let's say, grow more branchy, more laterally, we'll give it a little bit more space, right? So usually a lower planting density. Whereas if it's a cultivar that's very focused on that one main cola, main bud, then those we like to grow at a higher density, but do a little bit more pruning, remove some of those branches that we know are not going to be as productive, let's say. So there's definitely ways to play around with that, and each cultivar is going to grow differently. So what we like to do is just start trying things out. When we do our pheno hunting, for example, we grow different densities. We kind of let them go, don't do too much pruning, and see what happens. And then based on the quality of the top bud versus the bottom, then we'll decide, okay, maybe if we would have removed a little bit more branches here, or maybe put uh, yeah, some more or a higher density, for example, then we could have gotten more of that top pot that we're looking for. So yes, there's definitely differences, but that's what's fun about cannabis. Like there's so much variability out there.
Choose your own adventure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, everyone has their own way. And when it comes to pruning, let's start with the benefits, to a proper canopy management and maintenance protocol. How does pruning fit in?
Yeah, so I mean, pruning is the main technique that we use for shaping the canopy, hands down. I mean, if done properly and at the right time, it could lead to some pretty powerful results on on flowering plants in terms of capturing light, how they penetrate, the bud size uniformity. We can help decrease the variability and THC or cannabinoid content from bud to bud. And as I was saying before, if you have a congested canopy, that can lead to high humidity microclimates that can eventually lead to disease and things like that. So definitely pruning is a must for many cultivation systems. It also depends on the labor, right? Like, or what's the goal of your cultivation strategy? Like,
right.
What are you trying to get out of the system? And most of the times we focus on cultivation systems that focus on high quality bud. So how do we get as much high quality bud from the canopy, right? And yeah, so creating that canopy structure and having it so that it's not too congested or too deep, like I was saying, can lead to increasing that yield, and also the plant's not really spending energy into leaves or flowers that are very deep in the canopy that are not going to be filling up, and they're just going to end up as trim or just
not used in general. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned timing is extremely important. Could you put some numbers to that?
Yeah, I mean, timing, like I said, it depends on the cultivar as well. Like I think definitely for flowering plants, it needs to be done at the beginning of the cycle. Depending on the veg period, you might have to do some pruning at that point, or if not, then within the first 3 weeks of flower. It also depends on how the cultivar grows, how much it stretches, what that final height is. That will determine when to prune. But mainly we're seeing that, within those couple of weeks at the beginning of the flowering cycle or closer to the end of the veg cycle is when you need to be pruning. We definitely don't like to go in and remove too many branches all in one go, because that stresses out the plants, and it might cause issues in terms of too much irrigation, or maybe the EC starts getting too high in the substrate, for example. So definitely needs to be a little bit more let's say strategic, right? And that's also something that needs to be determined with trial and error, I think.
Let me tell you about the new Grodan improved Gro-Blocks, which comes with an advanced wetting technology developed in collaboration with a leading university in the Netherlands and trialed by the top growers across North America, many of those growers having been on Canna Cribs themselves. The improved stonewool substrate has more even WC and EC distribution throughout the entire height of the block, and even greater steering control, resulting in faster rooting in, higher yields, improved quality, increased resistance to diseases, and they use less water and nutrients throughout the entire cycle. Real science, real results. Check out Grodan101.com to learn more. I'll link the full URL in the description of this episode. And if you head on over to your favorite social platform, go to Grodan101, leave them a comment, and let them know Canna Cribs sent you. Let's talk about deleafing. We talked about pruning. Now, how necessary is deleafing in your canopy management protocols?
Yeah, so deleafing, also like pruning, it depends on the cultivation system and the cultivar as well. But at the end of the day, we like to remove leaves, at the right time and in the right amount, so that, again, that light can penetrate deep into the canopy, and those lower buds, the flowers closer to the lower part of the canopy, can get as much light as possible. The only issue with that is that removing too much leaf can lead to a reduction of leaf area index, and that could reduce your photosynthesis and potentially your yield potential as well, right? So I think there's a fine balance, but if it's done at the right times, then it can yield some pretty good results. And at the same time, I think with deleafing and pruning, I think there needs to be that trial and error, that you can grow a certain cultivar, see where how the canopy fills in, and then based on that, then decide that proper timing.
Yeah. So let's talk about technique. You're not just going in there and randomly, choosing. You have an intention. So let's talk about your deleafing techniques and what you can pass along to a fellow grower out there learning.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, leaves can be removed either using scissors or by hand. We actually prefer to do it by hand, just because it's a lot quicker. And once you get the hang of it, it's very very hard to actually do damage to the plant. So by hand, if the petiole is long enough, so the stem that is kind of attached to the leaf, if it's long enough, then you can simply bend it down, at its base, close to the stem, and then it should snap pretty easily. It's also important not to be overly aggressive when doing that, since you can sometimes remove some of that epidermal tissue on the stems, and that could create an entry point for pathogens, for example.
And probably the overall stress to the plant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the plant just soaks up so much when you're in the garden, and all the way down. This is just a quick aside, but I've heard all the way down to the music that you're playing when you're deleafing, when you're pruning. You want to have good vibes in there for those girls.
Definitely good vibes, yeah.
So when you're deleafing, do you have a specific time that it should be done, or how often it should be done?
Yeah, so it really depends on the cultivar. So if you're growing very vigorous cultivars, for example, or you're growing at a very high density, deleafing more often tends to be better. But in general terms, we typically recommend doing at least 2 deleafing events. The first one can be done when the canopy fills in, between weeks 2 and 4, let's say, and only the large fan leaves on the main stem or the main branches are typically removed. And then the second event that we go with is done about 1 to 2 weeks before harvest. And we go in and remove as many leaves that have that petiole or that little stem. We go in and we remove them, and what ends up what remains are just the flowers or the buds with their leaves, the sugar leaves as they call them. And what that does is just opens up the canopy as much as possible. Like at that point, the canopy is not going to try to fill itself. Those leaves are not going to try to expand anymore. At that point, it's just the crop is just focused on flower production, flower filling, let's say. So at that point, it's just going to allow for that light to penetrate those buds that were a little bit fluffy 2 weeks before harvest. Now they're going to end up getting some mass to them, and that will end up being part of that quality bud that you can harvest at the end, and that harvestable yield, and your yield should be going up if you do that. If you don't, then like I was saying earlier, you have some really nice buds on the top, but then the ones that were shaded will just end up being fluff and just not worth anything other than just for extraction or something.
Yeah. And diving into some practical kind of canopy management strategies. So a lot of people have heard about topping their plants, but what about bending? You talk about that a little bit in your chapter. Could you talk about the advantages?
Yeah, so bending, just like the name implies, is basically just branches that are bent and manipulated and secured somehow to change the structure of the plant or the canopy. It's the effect is very similar to topping. It kind of breaks that apical dominance and helps the plant redirect its energy to some of the lower shoots, so they can develop a little bit better. But this technique is mainly used on methods of growing like scrogging, for example, or screen of green, or low stress draining, for example. In the case of scrogging, growers use like a trellis netting, in which they bend the the branches, and they can actually increase the size of the canopy, by bending those branches laterally and outwards away from the center of the plant, and that increases the size of the canopy. As well as light penetration into that center, or the middle of the plant. But these techniques are quite labor intensive, and the results can vary a lot from cultivar to cultivar. So it's why you don't generally see this done in large scale cultivation. Any labor that is spent needs to be spent, let's say, in a smart way, and I would only look into doing something like this if, for example, I was operating in an area or state where I had plant count limit, for example, where my planting density was very low, and I had to increase that let's say that canopy, right? That canopy to intercept the light, right? So that's where definitely that has its place for sure.
Yeah. So you have been all over the world consulting farms. So of course, Canada, the United States, we talked about Colombia, Germany, other parts of South America, and Europe. What does the future of cannabis look like to a time traveler such as yourself?
Yeah, I think definitely that's a good question, but definitely learning from these areas or countries that have already gone through the growing pains of cannabis regulation. Seeing what they've done well, or maybe not so well. Definitely new operations need to be able to learn how to operate a cultivation facility that is efficient, that is effective, that strives to have the highest yields, in different cultivation systems, right? I think indoor has its place in the market, in indoor production, indoor flower, same as greenhouse flower, large scale production, same as outdoor cultivation as well. They all have kind of their independent places, I think, within the market. And what are the ways to optimize that? If it's an outdoor cultivation system, how do we maximize the yield, in terms of the location where things are grown, the planting times, or how do we better provide nutrients to some of these plants? Same as a greenhouse production, right? Like, what type of greenhouse do I need? So I think there's so many things that can be learned, and a lot of knowledge that can be passed down. And I think as a consultant, I can help with that, right? Like, I can help new growers kind of bridge that gap, and people don't have to kind of do all the work themselves, and go through all those growing pains themselves, right? So yeah, I think it's definitely an industry that's going to be is going to continue to grow, is going to continue to evolve, and more we see a lot more, let's say, commercial agriculture influences in the way that cannabis cultivation is. And like I was saying before, that was one of my main goals as a grower. How do I bring large scale greenhouse production practices into cannabis cultivation? So yeah.
That's great. Well said, Juan. And for anyone out there listening that wants to work with you and the Canna Cribs Consulting team, and Philip and Darren, hit that link in the description. We have an application for you to fill out to hire this brilliant grower right here. And cheers to the future, my friend. I hope that we can one day film a Canna Cribs episode at a facility that you have helped built out in Germany and Colombia. We've definitely focused on the United States, but as other countries, come online, we'd love to get outside the country and start filming elsewhere.
Definitely. That would be awesome. Looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Juan. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the community today?
I think, like I said, I think cannabis, there's so many different ways to do things. We've definitely kind of focused on maybe one way of doing things, but it really depends on how you're growing, cultivation system, what's available to you as a grower, how much, people or labor you have available, where you're growing, all these things. And every grower is different, and, we try to help them, directly in the way that we can. Right. So I think, we've provided some very detailed, things that you can apply to your grow, but at the end of the day, try things out and
yeah.
Cannabis is such a special plant that you can, make mistakes and start things over, and, each cycle is so short, and you can continue learning and things like that. So definitely try to, always improve and take things with a grain of salt too at the same time.
Words of wisdom to grow and live by. So with that, Juan, thank you so much. I will be seeing you guys soon. And as soon as your book is published, I'll be linking in the description of this episode.
Right on. Thanks a lot, Nick. It was a great pleasure.
Hey, thanks for tuning in today on the Canna Cribs podcast, brought to you by the top brands in the game. We have 6 categories we want to highlight to help you elevate your craft. Starting off with cultivation by Grodan, lighting by Horticulture Lighting Group, nutrients by Athena, climate control by Quest, post-harvest by GreenBroz, and dispensary by TREEZ. Thank you to these partners for helping us create this podcast and helping us bring more knowledge to your garden. If you want to support the Canna Cribs podcast, head on over to the link in the description or go to growershouse.com and check out these industry leaders today. And while you're there, hit us up on Instagram. Hit us up on the Growers Network forum. We have thousands of growers all around the world on both our Instagram and our forum, just like you, looking to elevate their craft. Happy growing.